Yeah, I want to ask one general question. First of all, I thought your book was excellent in exposing an aspect of Canada that often goes unknown to most people in the world. One of the things that we were just talking about in the green room was about how Canada has this image of a bastion of progressive, humane, kind of the alter ego of the United States. When the America is seen as this kind of imperialist power, even within progressive circles, but multicultural circles, the Native movement, Canada is always positioned itself as this kind of humane alternative to the United States. Can you explain to me and to the audience how Canada is able to manufacture this image in the light of its imperial foreign policy legacy? And is this an intentional caricature that it puts out?
Yeah, for sure. Maybe I can start, and then Eve, you can pick up anything I miss. I think in a way this speaks to the power of myth. Canadian leaders, they're very good at and they're very focused on projecting that myth that you described, that Canada is a uniquely democratic or even a uniquely benevolent actor on the world stage. It's a country that wherever it goes, it promotes human rights, democracy, feminism, etc. But of course, like the U.S., Canadian foreign policy is driven by corporate interests. It's driven by geopolitical concerns. It's driven by this broader imperialist desire to stifle governments that want to dismantle colonial or neo-colonial structures, governments that champion Pan-Africanism or pursue Latin American integration, basically governments that do anything that might undermine the US-led capitalist world order. And I think one of the things that's important to consider when talking about how Canada was able to build up this myth is the fact that, unlike Britain or other European powers, Canada never really had a formal empire. Unlike the US, Canada didn't really have this history of bloody interventions in Latin America, for example. And this was something that Canadian leaders identified during the Cold War. They said, and they said this in discussions with the US, with other Western powers, that Canada doesn't have this baggage that other imperial powers do. And so that will equip it to stand on a different footing when it talks to global South leaders. Canada can come in and say, we don't have this imperial baggage. We never colonized you. We're the kind face of capitalism, basically. And I think not having that history was very important in allowing Canada to build up this brand. And I think, Eve, if you want to add anything, you should go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's Canada has a big propaganda apparatus. It's also the two dominant colonial languages, English and French, are spoken here, and Canada's been a big player in all kinds of international forums where it's promotes its perspective. There's an element of it that for Canadians at least, it's sort of when you compare Canadian foreign policy to U.S. foreign policy, it is better. It's sort of it's an easy bar to compare to. It's a low bar. So right there's some of that, but it's crafted, right? Like if you go back to one of the important parts of the Canadian foreign policy myth of peacekeeping, this idea that Canada was a big peacekeeping force. The peacekeeping mission of 1956, where then Foreign Minister Lester Pearson wins the Nobel Peace Prize, it's literally an idea that John Foster Dulles put forward to Canada's foreign minister to basically extricate the British and the French from this disastrous invasion of Egypt that the U.S. didn't support, and Canada came in to basically assist the U.S. To extricate the former colonial powers, because Washington was the new power in the region and didn't want French and British influence. And so that became like a founding kind of 40, 50 years that was central to this idea of Canada benevolent force internationally. But it really was just to help Washington in its geopolitical game at that time. it's it's part of that. There's there are small things that are truths in that, right? Justin Trudeau was on the Colbert Report, I believe. The Canadian Prime Minister was on the Colbert Report 2 weeks ago or so, and when he was at the UN in New York, and he was all about talking about Canada's Medicare system, the universal health care, and sort of this playing to a liberal U.S. audience of wouldn't it be great to have universal health care, and which is true. It's better to have it than not. Lots of problems with Canada's universal health care, but it's better to have it than not. But that's not very. That's fairly superficial in terms of what the founding of Canada was about Europeans stealing Indigenous land, and Canadian foreign policy, since there's been a Canadian foreign policy, has been about expanding empire, advancing white supremacy, and advancing Canadian corporate interests globally.
Tucson, did you want to add anything?
Oh no, I'm so glad that that was addressed though, because I have wondered this for a very, very long time. I definitely learned plenty in reading the book, but I was aware that Canada had their involvement in a lot of nefarious things internationally.